With that, our heavy hitter, our cleanup batter, Dr. John Pafford.
It's all going to be anticlimax from here. I do appreciate Dara's early referring to me as angelic instead of Anglican, but I had to quickly correct it because I'm afraid my wife, who was sitting back here, was about to jump to her feet and clarify how wrong that is, or she was going to end up rolling around the floor holding her sides with laughter. Also, I want to mention, too, that international college to which Darren referred, from which I got my PhD, was one where I did work with Russell Kirk. I was one who had been in business early, then decided to get into education. I found I really missed the educational atmosphere, and I went on and got my master's degree, and then started teaching immediately. My father said, "John, go ahead and get your doctorate now." I said, "No, I'm going to do it later. I want to get started teaching now." You know, one of the things which parents live to hear, for those of you who are parents, you might relate to this, is when the time comes and your kids say, "You know, Dad," or "You know, Mom, you were right." And so he was right. I started teaching at Northwood and was planning to take my sabbatical and get to work and get the doctorate then, when Russell told me about International College, with whom he had a connection. This is an institution which is no longer in existence. I would like to think by having a doctorate from it and it's no longer being in existence would be unrelated statements. But Russell told me about that. You would work with a scholar. It could be anyone. Eric von Kannel-Ledeen in philosophy, Yehudi Menuhin in violin, Buckminster Fuller, in all kinds of areas of futurism. And so I worked under Russell for several years. Absolutely enjoyed every moment of it. When I bounced it off the Northwood administration, how they would regard a PhD from International College, their attitude was, if it's approved by Russell Kirk, that's all we need to know. And so thereby hangs a very interesting tale, which you won't get to hear today because my time is limited. I want to get into a couple of areas in particular. Brian did cover economics, which I may get to in a minute. But Russell's Christianity. Russell was raised in a family here in Michigan which was not at all religiously oriented. They were well-behaved people, they were law-abiding, but that spiritual foundation had evaporated. Now, all too often, as you well know, in civilization, once that spiritual foundation evaporates, then everything else comes crashing down later. Russell's family, again, though, still had the law-abiding, hard-working precepts. As a young man, Russell was very much drawn to being a free thinker. He likes to say that he never was an atheist because he wasn't that positive. An atheist has to be sure of something. He would call himself an agnostic in those earlier years. Then, as he matured, he started to become one who thought deeper on the foundations of civilization. He first came to be what I would call a civilizational Christian. That is, one who sees the necessity for a Christian foundation for our civilization, even though there really wasn't a particularly deep personal belief, which was a part of it. That would come later. But it's first that civilizational thinking. And then later, he did become a personal believer in Christianity. I'm trying to figure out how to lay this down here, in case you're wondering what I'm doing. So I can use both hands, and presumably you can hear me all right. Is that true? All right, thank you. I want to read something that Russell wrote in Roots of American Order, one of his key books, and one which was during the later stages of his career. Roots of American Order, and a statement by Russell on Christianity I think is very significant to have introduced at this stage. There are some good biographies of Russell which have been done, where I think his Christianity, though, was downplayed. As it turns out, by the way, I have a biography myself which I did of Russell, if I may stop for a brief commercial message, which is being published by Continuum as part of a series they're doing on leading conservative and libertarian thinkers. There are these 20 volumes, originally 20 volumes. They're out in hardcover right now, $130 a copy. I didn't like that reaction. I guess that gives me reality, although I can provide somebody with a discounted copy of 70. Then it'll be out in paperback early next year. But in Roots of American Order, Russell wrote, "How may a man be saved? Through faith in Christ Jesus, who descended from on high to suffer the deepest humiliation and pain for the sake of sinners. The law reveals to man the character of sin, but only Christ can wash away sin's marks." I don't think there's any Christian who can disagree with that summation of the Christian faith. He also, in others of his writings, continued on to establish this same fundamental belief in the necessity of Christianity as a foundation initially for civilization, then as a foundation for each individual. In terms of education, Russell's Christianity too factored in on this, because one of the things which he lamented immensely about the changes in American education during the post-World War II years, and in terms of Western education in general, was the progressive de-Christianization. He was one who was very, very, irritated, mad, furious with this progressive secularization trend. Because again, back to the point I'd made before, it was his contention that if you remove the Christian foundation from under civilization, particularly Western civilization I'm talking about, then the whole structure will collapse. And so this was the first thing that bothered him immensely about civilization in the United States, this progressive de-Christianization of it. He also was very concerned with the decline in standards, that the standards which had characterized earlier American education were slipping away as we were getting caught up with the concept that everybody is going to be educated the same way. I did a biography of John Jay, and it's intriguing to note that John Jay entered what is now called Columbia University, then King's College in New York, at the age of 14. In order to get into King's College, I guess in order to get in, he had to have displayed a mastery of Greek and Latin. And one of the entrance requirements was to translate the first 10 chapters of the Gospel of John from Greek to Latin. But the standards were high. Again, not that large a percentage of people went to universities at that time. What we have not really fully figured out is how to match extending educational opportunities to more people while maintaining the firm standards of before. Russell was extraordinarily concerned, though, about this movement away from standards. He didn't like the attitude that was coming into American education increasingly, that you get a higher education in order to get a job. He didn't object to people getting jobs. He certainly was not a supporter of the welfare state, and he certainly was not sort of a blind intellectual who put down everyone who didn't have his own concepts of the mind. He certainly was fully supportive of the need for our civilization to have people in all walks of life. But he did believe that education should essentially be imparting standards and values. Then, yes, there is a place for people to study specific job requirements later. But he was concerned about that movement away from the firm foundation of civilization. Once again, I would like to read his words. He's referring to colleges and universities. They ought to be centers for genuinely humane and genuinely scientific studies, attended by young people of healthy intellectual curiosity, who actually show some interest in mind and conscience. I'm saying that the higher learning is meant to develop order in the soul for the human person's own sake. I'm saying that the higher learning is meant to develop order in the Commonwealth for the Republic's sake. I'm arguing that a system of higher education which has forgotten these ends is decadent, but that decay may be arrested, and that reform and renewal still are conceivable. Russell was by no means one of these gloomy students, one of these gloomy analysts of contemporary events. He was one who was convinced, as a Christian, that all will be well. But even on the human level, he did believe in renewal. He didn't guarantee that it would happen, but he did believe in the possibility of renewal. All too frequently, there are people, particularly those who get to a certain age where your hair is no longer the original color that it once was, that you start to think in terms of the fact that things just aren't the same as they were when you were young. They just won't be, and that things have gone downhill. There are changes for the worse which have taken place, but again, Russell was never one who was filled with gloom about prospects for the future. I repeat, he did believe that renewal certainly was within our grasp. Wouldn't guarantee that it would happen. And he did believe as a Christian that in the final analysis, God is in charge and his will prevail. What Russell would like to have seen happen in higher education was to move to 3 years for a bachelor's degree and have a 6-month academic year with 1 month off at Christmas, 1 month off at Easter, and then the summer vacation, because he wanted young people who were going to college to have the opportunity to experience life. When he did his doctoral work at St. Andrews in Scotland, he was teaching 6 months of the year at Michigan State University, and the other 6 months he was going to Scotland to study at St. Andrews. So he was doing that himself, and he spent a lot of time traveling around Europe on his own, particularly traveling on foot, tramping through the Pyrenees, for example, and simply getting to know people better by moving on foot. There are some others, I'll just be brief on this one, who did believe in the same thing about changing the nature of our higher education. I remember reading one man who was convinced that we should first of all start higher education earlier. Start after 10 years of secondary school, not 12 years, because it was his argument that a lot of the time that our students spend in their final 2 years is wasted. They're not gaining that much intellectually. I bounced that off a number of my students. Well, not a number. Anyone who I can get to talk at Northwood. And I find an awful lot of students who particularly regard their last year intellectually as not having been worth that much. And he would like to see students start at, this is the author I'm referring to, at the age of 16. Colleges would have to change a bit. I have to go back to when I entered college in the early 1950s, when there actually was order in the dorms. And we guys, who could be just as rowdy as anyone today, couldn't get by with it. You know, generations don't change that much. It's just that when we were that age, again, we couldn't get by with it. Our parents didn't let us get by with as much, and certainly the colleges didn't. So Russell had some very definite reforms he wanted in education. Brian talked about economics. I guess I'll take another couple of minutes on that. Brian spoke on education, on economics, and he made a very good point. Well, he made a number of good points, but one I'm referring to in particular right now, it's not the only good point you made, is that Russell did not see economics as an end-all and be-all. He was not an economic determinist. The words economic determinism are generally used in reference to Karl Marx, but actually there are people on the right who are also economic determinists. You can find conservatives who see economics as the foundation, as the root of everything. Russell very definitely was market-oriented. There's absolutely no question about that. In fact, I'll also read a couple of words of Russell's, a few words of Russell's in reference to that. In a market economy, healthy competition improves the quality of goods and lowers their prices. This healthy competition in the selling of goods is a major reason why countries with a market economy are prosperous. Now, for the audience we've got here, there's nothing particularly remarkable about those words, and I don't think anyone's going to jump up and scream heresy, heresy at me for having praised a market economy. So Russell is clear on a market economy, but he would also go on to say, economics is not a religion, nor is it a political system, nor is it a sure recipe for happiness. Economics is simply the study of producing, distributing, and consuming goods. Money can buy a great many things, perhaps more things than it should, but it cannot buy good character or honor, or the love of created beings, or the love of God. In the industrially developed nations of our time, a good many people think they'll be happy if only they obtain plenty of goods and services. Christians know this is not true, however. The Bible teaches that happiness comes from being in God's will. Russell goes beyond, for example, what Milton Friedman stated in Free to Choose, which is a fine book, Free to Choose. Actually, Milton and Rose Friedman wrote it together, but in Free to Choose, you read the statement, the combination of economic and political freedom produced a golden age in both Great Britain and the United States in the 19th century. That's true as far as it goes. It's certainly true economically, but again, Russell will take things further than that with the fact that economics, market economics again, would be a very vital part of a healthy civilization, but there is more to it. And looking at my watch, I'll stop right there.